How does an empire rise from a small principality to rule vast lands across 3 continents? Let's travel back to the late 13th century. In northwestern Anatolia, a chieftain named Osman leads a group of Turkish warriors. Over decades, these determined fighters carve out territory from remnants of the Byzantine world, slowly, steadily, always pressing forward. A fragment from medieval Ottoman chroniclers evokes the ambition of the age. They set forth as the arrow leaves the bowstring, seeking sovereignty over lands yet unseen. Early Ottoman Chronicle. Empires, at their core, are stories of ambition. The Ottomans begin small as a border principality, poised between older powers like Byzantium and new rivals vying for the fractured remains of past caliphates. Their rise seems improbable, yet by 1453, their banners fly over Constantinople, the fabled city that ruled the Eastern Roman Empire for more than 1,000 years. Pausing to reflect, what allowed a modest Anatolian tribe to not only challenge, but ultimately conquer one of history's greatest cities? It wasn't just military might. The Ottomans learned to blend cultures, create pragmatic alliances, and infuse their state with a sense of purpose that transcended old boundaries. As the centuries unfold, the empire becomes a crossroads for people, ideas, and faiths. Ottoman sultans rule over Turks, Greeks, Armenians, Jews, Arabs, Slavs. Their capital, Istanbul, humming with commerce, languages, and the swirl of global ambitions. Listen to these lines from an epic poem composed for Sultan Suleiman, remembered as the Magnificent by Europeans and the Lawgiver by his people. He whose shadow shelters many peoples, who weighs justice as gold is weighed. 16th century Ottoman court poetry. Suleiman's era marks the height of Ottoman power. Under his rule in the 16th century, the empire extends from Budapest in the north to Yemen in the south, from Algiers in the west to Baghdad and beyond in the east. Armies march, architects shape the skyline, scholars debate theology and politics in mosques and coffeehouses. Yet, the legacy of Suleiman isn't only in conquest or marble, it's in the ways he tried to bind such an enormous realm together. The Ottomans developed an administration that could bridge religious and linguistic divides, codifying laws, balancing the power of military leaders and provincial governors. Pause for a moment. How does an empire actually work? Not just armies and palaces, but systems and expectations. How taxes are collected, how justice is done, how people live their daily lives. The Ottomans used the millet system, allowing different religious communities to govern their own affairs, from schools to marriage to burial. Each millet, Greek Orthodox, Armenian, Jewish, others, elected its own leaders. The idea was both pragmatic and profound. Diversity wasn't just tolerated, it was structurally managed. Consider a verse by the Jewish poet Sadi Levi, living under Ottoman rule. In this city, tongues are many, but law shields all alike from fear. Ottoman-era Sephardic poetry. The empire's tolerance had limits. Conflict and brutality were real. Yet compared to many of their neighbors, the Ottomans built a reputation for relative coexistence that echoed far beyond their borders. Istanbul's skyline presented another vision of diversity and ambition. Rising above the Bosphorus, the domes and minarets of mosques like the Süleymaniye and the Blue Mosque tell a story in stone. Designed by the legendary architect Sinan, these buildings were meant not only to inspire awe, but also to declare, this is a center of the world, a meeting place of cultures and a city where the future is made. A stanza from a dedication to the Süleymaniye Mosque reads, "Stone upon stone, the dome rises like a prayer answered. Light and shadow intermingle as people of all lands pass beneath its gaze." Inaugural inscription, 1557. But every rise triggers challenges. By the 17th and 18th centuries, the Ottoman system faced mounting pressures within and without. European powers, the Habsburgs, the Russians, later the British and French, began to encroach on Ottoman lands, taking advantage of every weakness. At home, technological innovation lagged, provincial lords grew restless, and sultans struggled to keep up with changes in warfare and trade. The old system, once so flexible, at times seemed stuck in tradition, unable to adapt as the world shifted. In his letters from the empire, an Ottoman administrator laments, "We were the sun at noon, but clouds multiply. Our ships are slow, our walls crumble, yet we remember former glory as if it might return with tomorrow's dawn." 18th century correspondence. Even as decline set in, the empire's culture endured. Coffee houses filled with news and controversy. Sufi mystics gathered for poetry and music. Philosophers debated fate and free will in languages and dialects from across the empire. Periods of reform flickered through the 19th century. Bureaucrats and sultans, some eager, some grudging, attempted to centralize power, introduce railroads, telegraphs, conscript armies. They studied European banking methods and legal codes, hoping to stave off decline through modernization. Envision a proclamation echoing through the streets of Istanbul. Henceforth, all subjects, Muslim or Christian, rich or poor, shall have equal protection under just law. Tanzimat Edict, 1839. These reforms, known collectively as the Tanzimat, were bold, but they also created friction. New rights and obligations clashed with old traditions. Some groups gained, others felt threatened. Tensions simmered, alliances shifted. The pace of change outstripped the state's ability to adapt. Pause and consider. Can a centuries-old empire truly reinvent itself? Or does the weight of history inevitably pull it in another direction? For the Ottomans, change was a double-edged sword. Reform invigorated some areas, but war, debt, and nationalist movements chipped away at the empire's integrity. By the early 20th century, the sick man of Europe was a phrase whispered in the salons of competing powers. World War I became the crucible that would finally break the old order. The Ottoman heartland itself became a battlefield, torn by outside invasion and internal upheaval. In the aftermath, a final proclamation, a bitter echo of former power, marks the end. By the will of the people, the rule of the Sultanate ceases. A republic is born in its place. Grand National Assembly, 1922. The empire is gone, but the imprint is everywhere. In the streets and languages of Istanbul, in customs kept alive in corners of the Balkans, North Africa, and the Middle East, in the echoes of architecture, music, and food, in the laws and dreams of successor states still grappling with questions the Ottomans once faced. So when we look back at this empire, not just its conquests or its decline, but its long negotiation between unity and diversity, tradition and innovation, what can we learn? Perhaps the most profound lesson is that empires are mosaics, not monoliths. They are held together by stories as much as by force, by negotiation as much as by decree. Some final lines from a 20th century Turkish poem capture this historical ambiguity. Where empire fell, seeds were scattered, each a memory, a promise, a warning to those who would rule and those who would dream. Modern Turkish verse. The Ottomans rose from obscurity to greatness, sustained a vast web of peoples across the centuries, and eventually yielded to modernity's relentless tides. Their story is not just history, it is a